The current date is October 9th, 2025. Western Wyoming, early autumn of 1892. The morning sun rose pale through a mist of gold and red leaves, the air sharp with the promise of frost. In the small frontier town of Red Willow, silence ruled the streets before dawn. Beyond the town lay Jack Rollins's modest ranch, nestled at the edge of sagebrush and scrub pines. Jack Rollins rode slowly along the rutted fence line, checking rails and posts. At 33 he was lean and steady, his face weathered by sun and wind. Since the death of his wife he had taken few words, living quietly with his daughter Sadie. 4 years old, Sadie walked beside the saddle, small boots crunching in the morning dust, her breath a soft cloud in the cold air. They approached a stand of sycamore trees, their golden leaves shimmering in the light. Under one gnarled trunk lay a shape half hidden by fallen leaves and roots. Jack reined in his horse. Sadie halted, clutching the reins. Jack dismounted, eyes narrowing. The shape was a burlap sack, old and stained. He knelt and brushed aside leaves. The sack bore dark patches, blood. His heart quickened. He folded back the top edge and peered inside. His breath caught. There she was, a young woman, limp, her wrists tied, bruised skin showing on her arms and face. Her hair was tangled, her features pale. She looked as though she had been placed there like refuse. Sadie stood silent behind Jack, small fingers pressed to her lips. Jack's pulse thundered. Sadie's voice, small and urgent, broke the silence. "Papa, she's my mama." Jack froze. He stared at Sadie, then at the woman. In that moment, Sadie's imagination, stories Jack had told her of her mother and the faint, hazy memories Sadie carried, they converged. That woman's dark hair, her gentle hands, her lashes. For a heartbeat, Sadie believed she saw the mother she could not remember. Jack's jaw tightened. He lifted the woman carefully, slipping his coat beneath her so she would not rest directly on rough wood. Sadie climbed into the saddle behind him, burying her face into his back. They rode back toward the ranch. Word spread swiftly. By noon, neighbors gathered, leaning on fences, trading whispers. Mrs. Turner was first, Jack Rollins delivering stray calves or trouble this time. Jack carried the woman into the barn. He laid her gently on a spare mattress. Sadie stood by her side pale, and watching a neighbor called out, "You found her in a sack. That's dangerous business. Hand her to the law." Jack turned, voice low but firm. "She's not awake yet. None of you heard what she has to say. Don't damn her before she can speak." Murmurs rippled. Some villagers shifted uneasily. A man spat to the ground. Others swallowed hard. Jack offered no more. He shut the barn doors. Inside he set a lantern, fed gentle water, covered her with blankets. Sadie tiptoed to the mattress, smoothing the blankets over the bruise-marked arms. Outside voices rose. She might be outlaw. Maybe she's a runaway. Jack Rollins ought to turn her in. Jack stood in the doorway watching faces. He remained silent, hands in pockets, shoulders squared. Sadie slipped behind him, clutching his leg. At dusk, the barn was quiet. The girl still lay unconscious. Sadie sat at the foot of the mattress, toy doll in lap. She whispered, "Mama, Mama," into the dim light. The word hung between them like a prayer. Jack paced among stalls, listening to wind-rattling boards. He would not summon the sheriff yet. He would protect her until she woke. The townsfolk would judge, rumors would roam, but tonight, in the shadow of the sycamore grove, a broken girl lay safe under his roof, not as a burden, but as a human in need of mercy. Western Wyoming. 2 days later, the quiet of Jack Rollins's ranch had been broken by murmurs and boots crunching the gravel path. A dozen townsfolk stood outside the gate, faces pinched with concern and suspicion. Some leaned on fence posts, others held their arms crossed over thick coats. At the center stood Deputy Harmon, his hat low over his eyes, mouth set in a hard line. "You need to let us take her, Jack," he said. "A girl shows up in a bloody sack, beaten half to death, and now she's lying under your roof. That's a whole heap of trouble for one man and a child." Jack stood tall on the porch, arms folded. His eyes were quiet, unreadable. Sadie peeked from behind his leg, holding tight to his pants. "She isn't even conscious yet," Jack said calmly. "You haven't heard her speak. You don't know her name." "Don't condemn someone you've never met," Mrs. Turner snapped. "You've got a daughter, Jack. Think of her safety." "I am," he replied. "And I'm thinking of hers, too." He nodded toward the barn. The crowd grumbled. Deputy Harmon's brow creased, but after a moment he stepped back. "You'll be held responsible for whatever happens." Jack gave a single nod. "I always am." Inside the barn, quiet returned. The girl still lay pale and still on the mattress. Jack had moved to the corner near the stove. A gentle fire glowed, and the scent of warm broth filled the air. Jack sat beside her with a damp cloth, wiping her brow in silence. Sadie stood at the edge of the cot, her doll in hand. That evening the girl stirred. She gasped and bolted upright, eyes wide with terror. Her hands clutched the blanket as if it were armor. When she saw Jack, she shrank back, breathing fast and shallow. Hey, Jack said softly, holding up both hands. "You're safe. No one here is going to hurt you." She looked between him and Sadie, confusion clouding her bruised face. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her lips trembled. Jack reached into his coat pocket and drew out a folded cloth, pale blue with worn stitching. He held it out. "My wife used this," he said before she passed. "It's clean, soft, like peace." He placed it near her, not forcing it. "You don't have to remember everything. Just remember this. You're alive. That's what matters." The girl took the cloth slowly, clutched it to her chest, and curled sideways on the bed. Jack stood and walked to the door, leaving Sadie behind. That night Sadie sat beside the cot, legs tucked beneath her. The firelight flickered over the girl's face. Sadie leaned close, brushing a finger along the girl's sleeve. "Mama," she whispered, barely audible. "Mama, you're home now." The girl did not open her eyes, but tears shimmered at the corners. The next morning the girl was awake. She still said nothing. Jack gave her space, leaving a tin mug of warm water by her side and a plate of soft bread. Sadie brought a small wooden brush and handed it up without a word. Later, as the sun slanted through the barn window, Sadie sat on the floor beside her and asked gently, "What's your name?" The girl shook her head. I don't know." Sadie looked at her hair, tousled and dark, catching the red of the firelight. "Rosie," she declared, "like the roses Mama used to press in her books. Your hair is just that color." The girl blinked, startled. "Rosie?" Sadie nodded. "Yes, Rosie." Jack, overhearing from the doorway, didn't argue. He simply met the girl's eyes and gave a slow nod. "Rosie it is." That night, as the fire burned low and the wind whispered outside, Rosie lay on her side with the blue handkerchief tucked beneath her cheek. Beside her, Sadie curled up with her doll and whispered again, "Mama." Rosie let the tears fall silently into the pillow. She did not correct her. Western plains stretched gold under a sky the color of old tin. Jack stood beside a chestnut mare named Clover, reins loose in his hand. Rosie hesitated by the barn door, arms crossed, one foot drawing quiet circles in the dirt. "You don't have to," Jack said gently, nodding toward the saddle. Rosie shook her head. "No, I want to." The bruises on her face had faded to soft yellow. Her eyes still held shadows, but she stepped forward. Jack helped her mount slowly, steadying her leg. "That's it," he murmured. "Let her feel you, not fear you." He walked beside her as Clover moved at a careful pace. Rosie gripped the pommel tight at first, knuckles white, but after a few minutes her fingers relaxed. The first week they stayed close to the paddock. Jack never pushed. He walked with her every morning, adjusting the stirrups, reminding her to breathe. Sadie followed with a basket of apples for the horse. At night Jack moved the wooden chair a little closer to the fireplace, so Rosie would be warmer. He cleaned her bandages with practiced hands, and never asked about the scars. Each morning there was always fresh hot water waiting in the tin basin by her cot, and though there were only 2 mugs in the house, he always gave her the porcelain one, the one with the faded bluebirds his wife once used. Once she noticed her gloves mended with new thread. When she looked at Jack, he only shrugged. "Tore easily," he said. Rosie began helping with small chores, gathering eggs, brushing the horse. Jack led her. Sadie trailed behind, chattering cheerfully, telling stories about the stars and her dreams. Rosie listened, smiled, and nodded, but rarely spoke more than a few words. One afternoon, Jack led Rosie further out, past the old willow tree into a wide field, where the grasses waved like a golden sea. Clover trotted gently, and the wind lifted Rosie's hair. Suddenly, Rosie froze. Her fingers trembled on the reins, her breath caught. Jack looked up sharply. "Rosie!" Tears spilled down her cheeks before she knew they were there. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Her voice cracked. "I've been here before, or someplace like it. There was sun and grass. I remember a voice, a man's. I was on a horse." I laughed. She shook her head, confused and overwhelmed. It was warm. Jack stepped closer, but did not touch her. "That's something. A peace. I do not know who I was with," she whispered, "but I felt safe." Sadie, seated on the fence, slipped down and walked over. She reached up and patted Rosie's leg with her tiny hand. "It's okay, Mama," she said softly. "I remember for you." Rosie looked at the child, wide-eyed. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Jack saw it, the flash of emotion, deep and raw, and looked away to give her a moment. That night, Rosie sat by the fire holding the mended gloves in her lap. Jack poured her tea and left the mug beside her. No words passed, only the quiet comfort of shared silence. The girl in the sack had begun to fade. In her place, slowly, Rosie was becoming someone real. Western frontier deep into autumn, nightfall cold and sharp over the Rollins ranch. A chill wind howled through the valley as Jack Rollins stirred the last coals in the hearth. Rosie was asleep in the cot, her leg bandaged from a fall the week prior. Sadie, curled beside her, had long drifted into dreams, her little hand still resting gently on Rosie's wrist. Then came the knock, sharp, steady, not frantic, not hesitant. Jack moved to the door, revolver holstered at his side, and opened it just a crack. A tall man stood on the porch, coat flecked with dust, a polished silver star glinting on his chest. "Name's Darius Finch. Detective out of Cheyenne." Jack didn't move. "What brings a city badge out this far?" "I'm looking for someone. A young woman, name unknown. Escaped a children's home 2 weeks ago after it burned to the ground. They say she might have had something to do with it." Jack's gaze stayed steady. "Lots of women pass through these parts. Don't make them criminals." The detective's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This one's different," she ran. "That says something." Jack grunted. "It says she was scared. Maybe." Finch stepped closer. "Or maybe she's hiding something worse." Jack didn't flinch. "If you've got a name or a face, come back in daylight." "Not tonight." Finch narrowed his eyes. "I hear she's injured. Taken in by a rancher, a widower with a daughter." His gaze flicked past Jack into the dim cabin behind him. "That wouldn't be you, would it?" Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Finch gave a cold smile and tipped his hat. "I'll be back with a warrant if I must." Then he turned and vanished into the trees. Jack closed the door and bolted it. Behind him, Rosie stirred in the cot, her brow damp with sweat. "What was that?" she whispered, voice fragile. "Nothing you need to worry about," Jack replied, but his voice held an edge. The fire hissed in the hearth. Sadie slept on, but Rosie didn't. Later that night, when all was still, Rosie slipped from bed. She moved quietly, careful not to wake Sadie. She found Jack's old coat and her boots. The fear was back, pressing on her chest, tight and breathless. The detective's voice echoed in her head. She stepped outside into the night. The air was biting cold. The stars shimmered high above. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay, couldn't risk putting Jack or Sadie in danger. Behind her, Sadie woke. The cot was empty. "Mama," she whispered. "Mama." She ran to Jack's room, panicked. "Papa, she's gone." Jack sat up, heart thudding. He rushed to the door, grabbed his lantern, and followed the small tracks in the frost. "Rosie!" he shouted into the night. "Rosie!" No answer. Sadie trailed behind him, her small legs trembling. The trail led toward the edge of the ridge where the land dropped sharply into brush and broken rock. Jack held up the lantern. Then he saw it, a crumpled shape at the base of a slope. Rosie. He moved without thinking, scrambling down the steep incline. Rosie was unconscious, her leg bent at an unnatural angle. Dirt streaked her face. Her breathing was shallow. He knelt, gently gathering her in his arms. Her body was ice cold. Sadie sobbed at the top of the hill. "Mama, please come back." Jack looked up, then called softly, "Stay there, Sadie. I'll bring her back." It took nearly an hour to carry Rosie up the slope. Jack's muscles ached, but he didn't stop. Back at the ranch, he laid her by the fire and covered her in every blanket he could find. Sadie crawled beside her, holding her hand tightly. Rosie stirred once, eyelids fluttering. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. Jack brushed her hair back. "Don't be," he said. "You came back. That's enough." Sadie leaned close, her voice soft. "Mama, please don't leave again." Rosie didn't reply, but a tear slid down her cheek. Outside, the wind howled over the hills. Inside, Rosie was home for now. And Jack knew they weren't just protecting her anymore. They were keeping their family whole. The storm had passed, but a colder one lingered inside the cabin. Rosie lay curled on the cot, swaddled in layers of wool and silence. Her face was pale, her lips cracked from cold and fear. Jack sat beside her, quiet, his eyes watching the flicker of firelight dance across her skin. He had not asked her why she left. Not yet. Outside, Sadie sat on the porch steps, chin tucked into her knees, hugging a ragged old doll. Rosie stirred, her eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. She looked around, confused at first, then alarmed. Her hands twitched as if to run again, but her leg betrayed her, bandaged, stiff. Jack noticed. He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his voice low. "You're safe," he said. "You're home." Her breath quickened. I shouldn't be here." Jack reached over and poured water into a chipped tin cup, handing it to her. "You shouldn't be freezing in a ravine either," he said. "Drink." She hesitated, then took a sip. Her hands trembled. Jack set the cup down. Then he leaned back in the old wooden chair beside her. "I don't know what they said to you," he began, "or what you believe about yourself, but I saw what you did." Rosie looked up, her eyes wary. "What do you mean?" Jack folded his arms. His voice was soft but certain. "That night before you left, the creek swelled from the storm. One of the colts got out, fell in. You dragged it out. Risked your own life, your bad leg and all." Rosie's mouth parted in disbelief. "I saw it," Jack continued. "I was up near the shed. You didn't know anyone was watching." He paused, then said, "If you're a bad person, then you're the first bad person I've ever seen risk their neck to save a drowning horse." Rosie's lips trembled. She turned her face away, ashamed. A tear rolled down her cheek. Jack leaned forward, gently dabbing the tear with a soft handkerchief, the same one his late wife once used. "I don't care who you used to be," he said. "All I know is you're the one my daughter trusts." His voice cracked slightly on that last word. Rosie began to cry in earnest, quiet, choking sobs that shook her frame. Jack didn't stop her. He just sat there, steady as the old pine walls around them. Moments later, tiny footsteps padded across the floor. Sadie stood near the edge of the cot, holding the worn doll in both hands. Her voice was timid. "Mama, she told me to give this to you." Rosie blinked through tears, confused. Sadie walked closer, lifting the doll with great care. "My mama," she said softly. Before she went to heaven, she said, "One day I should give this to someone brave and kind." Rosie reached out, almost afraid to touch it. Her fingers grazed the fabric, old but clean. Her breath caught in her throat. Sadie leaned in, hugging her gently. "That's you." Rosie wrapped her arms around the child, clutching her and the doll to her chest. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Jack's voice answered from the chair. "Maybe not, but that doesn't mean it isn't yours." Outside, snowflakes drifted like ash over the land. Inside, a fire crackled, warm and patient. For the first time since waking in a sack under the sycamore tree, Rosie felt something shift, soft and dangerous and beautiful. Hope. Rosie sat alone beneath a cottonwood tree behind the barn. Her leg had healed, but her heart had not. The wind stirred through the branches like whispers from a life she had tried to forget, and now it was all coming back. She had been 10 when they brought her to Hollow Creek Orphanage, a bleak building at the edge of nowhere with broken windows and colder rules. The children never smiled. The adults rarely spoke except in commands. Years passed in silence and suspicion. She learned to keep her head down, her mouth shut. But the older she got, the more she noticed children disappearing in the middle of the night, new ones arriving with no names, no pasts, and no one ever asked questions until she did. "I found a ledger," she whispered one night to the wind, her hands gripping her skirt. "In the attic. It had names, dates, payments." She'd been cleaning the warden's office, dusting behind the old desk when her fingers touched a loose board. Behind it, the book had waited. Handwritten pages, careful columns, initials she remembered from bedtime roll calls. When she confronted the matron, it was like lighting a match in a dry forest. They beat her, locked her in the cellar. Then days later, the fire. It tore through the west wing of the orphanage. 2 children died. The newspapers called it a tragic accident. But Rosie knew better. It was a warning. She had buried the ledger at the base of an old tree, a twisted sycamore just beyond the fence. Then she ran, but they found her. "They thought I died," she murmured, voice shaking. "They wrapped me in a sack and dumped me like garbage." She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but Jack was standing nearby. She hadn't seen him approach. He didn't speak. Not at first. Rosie turned, ashamed. Her hands trembled. "I should have told you, but I thought if you knew." Her voice cracked. "You'd send me away," she finished, barely audible. Jack knelt down slowly beside her. "You buried the truth," he said softly, "and they buried you for it." She looked at him, her eyes wide and full of tears. "It's not over. They'll come again." Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for her hand. His fingers were rough, warm, steady. He didn't say he believed her. He didn't say he forgave her. He just held on. And that was enough. She broke then, fully and deeply, leaning into him like a dam finally surrendering to flood. He wrapped his arms around her and held her as she cried, as the trees swayed, as the secrets she had carried for so long finally left her in ragged breaths. Inside the cabin, Sadie was coloring with broken crayons on a wooden plank. She looked up once toward the window. She saw Rosie and her father in the distance, not speaking, just holding each other. She smiled to herself, then returned to her drawing. It was 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, one in the middle with curly hair and a dress. A family. Outside, the wind picked up, and beneath the earth, buried deep at the roots of a gnarled tree, the truth waited in ink and paper and silence, waiting for the day Rosie would dare to dig it back up. But for now, she had something else, someone else. A place not just to survive, but to be believed, to be loved. Late afternoon, the wind heavy with storm. The knock came like thunder. Jack opened the door slowly. 2 men stood outside, one in uniform, the other with a badge pinned to a dark vest. Their horses were tied at the gate. The air between them and Jack held no warmth. "Jack Rollins?" the officer asked. Jack gave a quiet nod. "We've come for the girl. Name's Rosie Bellamy. We have a warrant issued from the state capitol. Arson, suspicion of manslaughter. She's to come with us." From inside, Rosie froze. The name, her name, echoed too loudly in her ears. She had known this day might come, but it still struck like lightning. Jack didn't move. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice low. The detective stepped forward. "That's not your decision. If she's innocent, she'll prove it in court." Jack turned to call for Rosie, but she was already at the door, standing behind him. Her eyes were wide but dry. There was a steadiness to her, born from nights without sleep and days carrying secrets. "I'll go," she whispered. "No," Jack said firmly. Just then, A small voice broke the tension. "Wait!" Sadie darted from the kitchen, still in her boots, clutching her ragged doll. She ran between Rosie and the lawmen, planting her little body like a fence. "She's my mama," she cried. "Don't take her, you can't." The wind stilled. The air inside the cabin held its breath. The officers glanced at each other, uncomfortable. One lowered his eyes. Behind them, footsteps approached from the dirt road. Townsfolk were coming. Quiet at first, then more certain. Men, women, children, farmers, storekeepers, even the blacksmith's wife. They had seen the riders. They had followed. Rosie stood stunned. Then, from the crowd, a voice called out, "I know that girl," said an elderly woman with silver hair braided down her back. She stepped forward, cane in hand, spine straight. "I worked in Hollow Creek years ago. I know what they did." She pointed a finger at the detective. "That child is telling the truth." A murmur spread like wildfire. Heads nodded. Whispers turned into words. Words into conviction. The sheriff hesitated. "Ma'am, that's not. You'll need more than ink on paper to steal her away from us." "Now," the old woman snapped. Rosie looked at Jack, shaken, but he was already moving. He stepped forward, took her hand gently. Then, to the astonishment of all, he dropped to one knee. "If the law needs someone to speak for her, let it be me," Jack said, voice steady, gaze locked on Rosie's. "If she needs protection, I offer my name. If she needs a future, I offer my life." He pulled from his vest pocket a ring, simple silver, worn with time. "I'm not asking because of duty. I'm asking because I want this. I choose you." The sun broke through the clouds in that instant, soft gold spilling over the hills. Rosie blinked back tears. The world around her fell away. In the center stood Jack on one knee, Sadie beside him, still gripping her doll, the town watching and the law waiting. She nodded. "Yes," she whispered. The crowd exhaled. Someone clapped. A cheer began, cautious but rising. Even the officer cracked a small smile. Sadie beamed. "See? She's ours." And that was how they stood, not as fugitives, but as a family, held together by more than names or records or laws. They were a family by choice, by love, by one brave little girl who had whispered the truth loud enough for everyone to hear. The winter passed with quiet resolve. Snow melted slowly from the ridges, and green buds peeked through the earth like hope returning after exile. Rosie had been cleared. The investigation exposed layers of corruption at the Hollow Creek home. Witnesses came forward, the names she had buried beneath an old sycamore tree, names in that leather-bound book, matched the missing, the lost, the silenced. No one called her a liar anymore. And when the frost finally broke, Jack Rollins built a small arbor at the top of the hill behind the ranch, near the same sycamore where it had all begun. It was Sadie's idea. "This is where she came back to life," she said, eyes shining. So it was settled. The wedding would be there. On the morning of the ceremony the town rose early. Someone brought quilts. Another strung up wildflowers on a rough wooden arch. The blacksmith carved two simple benches. Even the preacher hiked up the slope, Bible in one hand, cane in the other. Rosie stood at the base of the hill, breath caught in her throat. Her dress was plain cotton, ivory, sewn by hand with care. It had no lace, no train, but it shimmered in the sun like river water. Her hair was braided down her back. No veil, just honesty. Sadie stood beside her, holding a bouquet of wild daisies in goldenrod. Her little boots kicked dust, too excited to stand still. "You ready, Mama?" she asked. Rosie looked at her, heart full. "Yes, baby, more than ever." They walked up together, hand in hand. Jack waited beneath the sycamore in his best shirt, hat pressed to his chest. His eyes never left Rosie. The preacher raised his voice above the soft wind. "Marriage," he said, "is not the union of two perfect people. It is the promise of two imperfect hearts to stay when storms howl and rivers rise. It is standing firm side by side when the world says run." He looked at Rosie, then at Jack. "I ask you now, do you choose this life, this bond, this love?" "I do," Jack said. "I do," Rosie echoed, voice steady. The preacher nodded. "Then, by the strength given me, and the truth lived between you, I pronounce you husband and wife." Jack stepped forward, cupped Rosie's cheek, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You didn't just survive," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "You brought us back to life." Tears brimmed in her eyes. Sadie cheered, leaping into their arms. The crowd clapped. Some wiped their eyes. Others laughed softly. The wind swirled through the grass like a hymn. Later that afternoon the three of them rode together down the hill. Rosie sat behind Jack, arms wrapped around him. Sadie sat on her own little pony beside them, giggling with delight. "Mama," she called, "let's race." Rosie laughed, sunlight in her voice. "All right, sweetheart, but don't go easy on me." The horses thundered into the field, past fences and flowers, through the open land where love had taken root. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer held them. Together they galloped toward the future, toward spring, toward the promise of every sunrise yet to come. Years passed like seasons on the Wyoming plains, each one weaving deeper threads into the tapestry of their lives. The ranch grew modestly under Jack's steady hand and Rosie's quiet determination. They added a few more cattle, planted a vegetable garden that Sadie tended with pride, and even built a small addition to the cabin, a room just for Sadie, though she often sneaked back to sleep near her parents. Rosie never fully shook the shadows of Hollow Creek, but with Jack's unwavering support and Sadie's boundless love, she found ways to heal. She dug up the ledger one crisp autumn day, with Jack by her side, and turned it over to authorities who could be trusted. More truths emerged, more orphans found justice, and Rosie became a quiet advocate, writing letters and speaking softly to those who needed to hear that survival was possible. Sadie grew tall and strong, her childhood whispers of Mama evolving into stories she told her own children one day. She married a kind rancher from the next valley, and the Rollins ranch echoed with the laughter of grandchildren. Jack and Rosie aged gracefully, their love a constant flame against the winds of time. On quiet evenings they'd sit under the sycamore, hands intertwined, watching the sun set. "Papa was right," Sadie would say when she visited. "You were always meant to be here." And Rosie, with tears of joy in her eyes, would nod, knowing that from a sack in the dirt had sprung a life fuller than she ever dreamed. The end came peacefully for Jack first, in his sleep after a long day of work, his hands still holding Rosie's. She followed not long after, as if unwilling to be apart. Sadie buried them side by side under the sycamore, where it all began. The town remembered them not as heroes of grand tales, but as quiet pillars of mercy and love. And in the whispers of the wind through the golden leaves, their story lived on, a testament to second chances and the families we choose.